Hello, 3B students. I hope you're all doing well. Once again, another video lecture since we aren't at school in person, and I'll be teaching it this week. And the title of our lesson is Once Upon a Time. So these are your lesson objectives. I will not read them, but you can read them yourself, so you know what our lesson is about. But first, let's review some of our illness and injury vocab that we learned last week. So, learned about different types of sicknesses and injuries and what we do to treat them and get better, right? So some physical illnesses, we have sore throat, flu, diarrhea, an allergy, food poisoning, and more. So there's obviously more. Mental illness is something that affects our mind, right? Which also can affect our body, but mental illness refers to something that's in our mind. So depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, trauma. Trauma, I'll remind you, can be mental or psychological, but also we can have physical trauma to our body that can cause injuries, right? So an injury is some sort of when our bodies are physically hurt, right? So we have a twisted, sprained ankle, a cut or a wound, a burn, a broken arm, etc. So treat is to respond to an illness with medical help or to heal or to try to cure, right? So treat, after we get sick with something, we try to treat it, right? So we take cold or flu medicine, take smecta, we wear a cast, we clean a wound, eat or drink ginger. Those are all ways that we treat some of these illnesses, right? If we want to avoid getting sick, right? If we don't want to get sick in the first place, we prevent, right? So we take action so that something doesn't happen. So we get a vaccine, we wear a helmet on a motorbike so we don't fall and hurt our heads. We wear masks and social distance during COVID-19, etc. Right? So for this lesson today, I decided to introduce to you guys some different narrative tenses, past tense tenses, using a story, The King and the Buffalo Boy, which is a Khmer folk story that you might be familiar with. I love Khmer folk stories, and this is one that I chose. I thought it would be a fun way to teach you guys today's lesson. So I'll read it to you. Once upon a time, a king and his ministers were hunting in the forest. They had ridden together for many hours, but had not found any animals. As they were tired and hungry, they decided to stop and rest. The ministers ordered the servants to pitch the hunting tents and to prepare the special food for the king's lunch. While the king was waiting for his lunch, he saw a small deer bound into the forest. He quickly spurred his horse on to chase the deer. The young horse galloped briskly after the deer, carrying the king up one path and down another. Soon they were deep in the forest, and the king knew he was lost. He quieted his sweating horse and tried to listen for the voices of his ministers and servants. The forest was very still. The king heard only the leaves of the trees moving slightly and a few birds calling to each other in the distance. He was guiding his horse slowly through the trees when he heard the voice of a young boy. "Hello, is anyone there?" the king called out. "Yes," came the answer. "It is me, the buffalo boy." The king led his horse into the clearing, and the buffalo boy stepped out to greet him. "Hello, sir. Are you looking for me?" The king thought it best to pretend that he was an ordinary man, so he spoke to the buffalo boy with simple words. "My dear boy, I am lost. My friends made their camp at the edge of this forest near 2 large pepper trees. I wandered into this forest with my horse, and now I cannot find them." "Sir," the buffalo boy said, "do not worry. I know that place very well. I will show you the way." "Ah, that is good," said the king. "Please come and sit behind me on my horse, and we will ride together." The buffalo boy made sure his animals would be safe and then jumped up behind the king. He guided the king across the clearing and onto a hidden path under the spreading vines. As they rode along, the king thought to himself, "This is a kind and hard-working boy. I like him. I wonder if he likes me, his king?" Then the king asked, "My dear boy, do you know the king who rules this country?" "I don't know what you mean," the puzzled boy answered. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about kings, but I do not really know what a king is. I've never seen a king. I don't even know where a king lives." The king was a little taken aback or surprised. "Well, do you want to know what a king is? Would you like to meet a king?" "Oh, that would be fun," replied the buffalo boy. The king said, "If you lead me out of the forest to meet my friends, I will give you money, and I will also show you a king. When we meet my friends, you watch everyone carefully. Any man who keeps his hat on is a king. Remember now, if you watch carefully, you will know which man is a king." The buffalo boy promised the king that he would watch everyone carefully. Soon they arrived at the edge of the forest near 2 large pepper trees. Now, all the ministers and servants had been terribly worried about the king. As soon as they saw him riding safely out of the forest, they all jumped up and took off their hats. The king turned around to the buffalo boy and proudly asked, "Now, my dear boy, do you know who is the king?" The overjoyed buffalo boy laughed. "Oh yes, there are two kings here. I am a king and you are a king." Some of the ministers who were standing nearby overheard the boy. "Hey boy," they scolded, "you are not the king. You must never say that again." "Oh," the buffalo boy protested, "this gentleman told me that anyone who does not take off his hat is a king. I did not take off my hat, so I must be king." Okay, so in this story, there are different past tense tenses, right, that are used to tell stories. So one of them is the past perfect, also called the pluperfect, that we form in the positive form with the subject plus had plus the past participle of the verb, so verb 3. And in the negative, we insert not after had. And we use the past perfect to talk about something that happened in the past before something else in the past, right? So this shows the order of events in the past, right? So examples in the story are they had ridden together for many hours, but had not found any animals before they stopped to rest, right? So everything is happening in the past, but they had ridden and had not found any animals before they stopped to rest, which is the present simple, right? All the ministers and servants had been terribly worried about the king before they saw the king, right? So this is all in the past, but they had been terribly worried before they saw the king, right? So we have the past perfect, and then that's followed by the past simple, right? We can also, with this in question form, had they ridden together for many hours? So we simply change the order of some of the elements of the sentence. So you have they had ridden together for many hours, but had not found any animals. As they were tired and hungry, they decided to stop and rest. So they had ridden together and had not found any animals before they were tired and hungry, they decided to rest, right? So this might help you understand the past perfect. So we're talking in the present, right? We have the future, and then we have the past. So the past simple is they decided to stop and rest. We don't know when in the past, right? The past simple doesn't refer to any time specific. It's just in the past. Whereas the past perfect, they had ridden together for many hours. We know that that happened at a specific time in the past, right? They had ridden together, and then they decided to stop and rest, right? So that's the past perfect is used to talk about when something happened in the past. We also have the past continuous, which is formed with the subject plus was or were plus the base form of the verb plus ing. In the negative, we also put a not. So we have to talk about an action or event before now that started in the past and was going on when something else happened, right? So some examples from the story are while the king was waiting for his lunch, or he was busy waiting for his lunch, right? And then he saw a small deer bound into the forest, right? He was guiding his horse slowly through the trees when he heard the voice of a young boy. So something was continuous, something was happening continuously when something happened once, right? So the question form, we simply change the order. So was the king waiting for his lunch? So yes, those are two examples. We see he was waiting when, past simple. He saw a small deer bound into the forest. He was guiding. He heard the voice of a young boy. This might help you understand. So we have the past, which is before, the future is after the present. So in the past, let's say in the past, he was guiding his horse through the trees, right? So he was doing this continuously. And then he heard the voice of a young boy, right? So the past continuous usually is used to describe setting or something that can happen for a longer period of time. And then it's interrupted by something that happens, like he heard the voice of a young boy, something kind of quick or sudden, something that can be fast, right? So he heard the voice of a young boy, lightning struck or something like that, right? So past continuous, something that we were doing when something else happens. So conjunctions of time are useful with these tenses, right? So conjunctions are just words that are used to connect two sentences to make one sentence, right? So they show the relationship between ideas. When is a conjunction, which means at the time that something happens or happened, right? So it said, when we meet my friends, you watch everyone carefully. So at the time that we meet my friends, you watch everyone carefully. So when can mean a time in the future. When we meet my friends on Friday, you watch everyone carefully. It can also use when to join past continuous and past simple sentences. So we say, he was guiding his horse slowly through the trees when he heard the voice of a young boy. So he was guiding at the same time that he heard the voice of a young boy, right? While or as is similar to when, and they mean during or at the same time, right? So while the king was waiting for his lunch, at the same time that he was waiting for his lunch, he saw a small deer bound into the forest, right? As he rode along, at the same time that he rode along on his horse, he thought to himself, right? Before and after, you might already know what those mean, but before means earlier than a time or event, and after means later than a time or event. So the king saw the deer before he went into the forest. After the king went into the forest, he found the boy, right? So this is the order of things that happened. As soon as is immediately after something else happens, right? So as soon as they saw him riding safely out of the forest, they all jumped up and took off their hats, right? So as soon as means immediately, right after. So they saw him riding safely out of the forest, and then they immediately jumped up and took off their hats. So it means something happens right after another thing, right? So this might help. So we have a similar timeline that we used before. And we have, he was guiding his horse through the trees when he heard the voice of a young boy, right? So that's when is used. Join the past continuous and the past simple. While or as he was waiting for his lunch, he saw a small deer, right? So while or as he was doing something, then he saw a small deer, which interrupted, right? As soon as they saw the king, as soon as, right, they took off their hats. So this line is to show that they took off their hats right after, very quickly, after they saw the king, right? So a short period of time between when they saw the king and when they took off their hats, okay? We also have conjunctions of result and reason. So one conjunction is because, it means for a certain reason. So oftentimes the structure is because plus the reason for something, right? So because I did not take off my hat, I must be king, the buffalo boy says. Because the reason I did not take off my hat, that's the reason that I must be king. The king spoke to the buffalo boy with simple words, because he thought it best to pretend he was an ordinary man, right? So because he thought it best to pretend he was an ordinary man, the king spoke to the buffalo with simple words, right? So is the result of a reason, right? So usually it's the reason plus so plus the result. So we have, I did not take off my hat, that's the result, or that's the reason. And then we have so, the result is I must be king, right? So the result, I must be king because I did not take off my hat. So and because are kind of similar, but we flip the order, right? The king thought it best to pretend that he was an ordinary man. So the result of that reason is that he spoke to the buffalo with simple words, right? So this is the result or consequence of the underlined part of the reason. And then we also have the conjunction although to contrast ideas. So we have although plus the subject plus a verb, and then comma, subject plus verb plus object. So we say, although he is not well off, he is kind and generous. And it's used to link two contrasting ideas. So although the king was hungry for lunch, he was waiting for lunch, he went off into the forest, right? The king was excited for the boy to find out who his king was, although the boy called himself a king. So although is used to contrast two facts. One fact is makes the other fact surprising, right? So we're surprised that if someone is not well off, if they don't have a lot of money, it's surprising that they're kind and generous, right? It might be surprising that the king went off into the forest when he was hungry for lunch, right? We think he would wait to eat lunch, but no. So although is used to contrast two ideas. And thank you for watching and taking notes. I know this was a lot of new material, so please write down everything that you learned, any questions that you have, and ask them at our Zoom session tomorrow. And please stay healthy and safe, and we miss you very much at Berkeley. Okay,